Hope you like this. If you do, give it a thumbs up and leave any comments below. And remember to subscribe to the channel to be kept up to date on all my hypnotic bedtime stories. So I hope you enjoy the story.
So as you begin to comfortably drift off asleep, I don't know whether you'll drift deeper asleep with the sound of my voice, or whether you'll drift deeper asleep to the words I use, or perhaps even to the spaces between my words. And as you fall asleep, I'm going to tell a story in the background. A story about a man who is rowing down a river, and he's been rowing for some time. And he's got into a rhythm with his rowing, hearing the sound of the oar in the water on the left and the right, and the left and the right. The sound of pushing that water back and the boat moving forwards. And as he rows, so night sets in, moon rises in the sky, stars twinkle up in the sky. Everything takes on a blue hue, and the silver light of the moon shimmers on the surface of the water. And you can hear the water being moved with each row. As he continues along this river, and while night sets in, he can hear night sounds in the forest around the river. He can hear rustling leaves as the wind blows through the trees. And feel the smooth, calm movement of the boat as he continues rowing down this river. And the river twists and turns and just flows calmly. And he continues rowing down this calm river. And then after some time rowing down the river, this man decides that there's a space up ahead that he can see that looks like an ideal place to set up camp for the night. So he rows to that space, rows up onto the bank, climbs out the front of the boat, pulls the boat up onto the shore, puts the oars in the boat, gets his stuff out of the boat and starts to set up a camp. He creates a tent-like area using some material he's got and some wood that he's got. And then he creates a fire in front of that. Just a small little fire. Lights the fire. Places some material down inside the tent to sit on. Sits himself down. And makes himself some food to eat and something to drink. And he eats the food, drinks the drink, and then rests back and just enjoys the sounds around him, enjoys the sounds from the forest, enjoys the sound of that water lapping so gently on the shore. Enjoys gazing up at the stars, noticing them twinkle and move. And the occasional shooting star that flies overhead, and the bright moon in the sky, and the way it casts silver sparkles throughout the river. And he lies back in his makeshift tent, gazing up at the top of his tent, watching the way the light makes shadows dance around the inside of his tent, as that campfire slowly burns down to embers. And as the fire burns down to embers, so he drifts comfortably and peacefully asleep. And after a beautiful night's sleep, the man awakens. He can still feel some warmth from that fire, even though it's burnt down to just dust. And he eats some food, has some drink, packs everything away, looks around him, looks around where he is, looks up and down the river. Can hear the sounds in the forest. Drags the boat back into the water, gets back into that boat and carries on his journey, rowing down the river. And as the day continues on, so the man gets closer to his destination. And eventually the river opens up into a vast lake. And off in the distance, he can see hills, and behind them he can see mountains. You can notice the hills are green, there's all the trees, and the mountains have white tops. And then up in the sky, he notices what it is he's come here to find. He notices a castle in the clouds. A kind of shimmering, whitey, silvery castle in the clouds, just floating up there in the clouds. And this is what he'd come to discover. He didn't know how he was going to get to that castle. He thought to himself that he'd figure that out when he arrived. So he rowed the boat ashore, pulled the boat onto the shore, and started walking round the lake, looking up at the castle, trying to work out how you get up to a castle in the clouds. And as he walked around the lake, he could see something strange. There appeared to be something glowing off in the distance around the lake. So he walked around the lake towards that glowing area. And as he got there, he noticed it looked like magma coming up from the ground and flowing to the lake, just slowly and gently. It looked thick and gloopy, and it was giving off tremendous heat, and it just seemed to be flowing up through the ground and just gently flowing across the ground to the lake, where it's creating a white mist or fog as it boiled off the water at that point of the lake, that would travel a little way across the lake before dissipating. And around this little magma spot, the ground was black, where old magma had poured out and just gradually spread out in different directions. And occasionally it seemed to reach trees and plants, and before it had even reached them, they would burst into flames and turn to ash. And luckily it was flowing down towards the water, so it would flow out slightly widthwise, but always diagonally, always pouring down towards that water, never back towards the forest. He didn't know how this could be helpful. He didn't even think it could be. But he had been curious at why there was a light coming from here. He continued looking up at that castle, now in a different direction, trying to figure out how he can get to the castle in the clouds. And as he was thinking and wondering, he remembered stories of phoenixes that could rise from ashes. And so he decided he would try and summon up a phoenix. So he stood by the ashes that were just outside where the lava was burning. And he started chanting a ritual, reciting a ritual, trying to call up a phoenix. And he imagined in his mind this phoenix rising from the centre of the ashes and the magma from that lava flow. And as he chanted and drifted inside and gazed at that space, and his vision began to narrow, his attention began to narrow. He began to enter an altered state, and just as that was happening, he could hear some cracking, some different sounds. And then this huge black phoenix burst and broke free from that lava flow, from the ash, with golden talons, golden feet, and a golden beak. And once it was fully free and it shook off the ash and shook off the lava, it flew up in the sky, circled round, like it was gaining a sense of its freedom. looped in the air, dived down, and then landed on the shore near the man. The man was a bit startled, and he walked over to the phoenix, and the phoenix lowered its head to the ground and lowered itself down to the ground. And the man walked over beside the phoenix, touched the neck of the phoenix, could feel the warmth of the phoenix, climbed on its back, and it launched into the air. It flew around the cloud, flying higher and higher, until eventually it was above the cloud. And the man was looking down on the castle and the castle grounds. And the phoenix flew down and landed in the castle grounds, lowered itself down again, bowed its head, and the man climbed off. And the phoenix seemed to just wait while the man went exploring. And everything seemed so deserted, so quiet. And he walked down what looked like crystal-lined footpath to the entrance to the castle. He knocked on the castle with a huge reverberating sound, and the castle doors swung open slowly. He walked inside, and he could hear his echoing footsteps in the vast area of space. He walked around that area. He called out and got no reply. He walked up some steps to a landing, and then up some more steps to another floor. He started exploring in that area. He went over to a window and could see through the window out over the cloud grounds, and could see all the way down below the lake, the river, the mountains off in the distance. Everything looked so pristine. It looked like people must be here. Eventually he walked into a room where he found what looked like an upright humanoid wolf. And they spoke with a deep voice and a friendly voice. They spoke of a curse that inflicted their land. That their greed had led to this curse, where they all turned into wolves. And their castle was raised from the ground to isolate them for eternity. And they were to live out for eternity. And that this castle used to be where the lake now is. And it was pulled from the ground and raised into the air, floating on a cloud. And they'd never seen anyone since they've been up here. And it already felt like an eternity. And they'd had that eternity to think, to learn, to realise their focus was in the wrong place, and that they'd brought this curse on themselves. And the man spoke and said he'd come here because he'd heard legends that there was a chalice, and that if you drank from that chalice, you'd experience serenity, you'd experience a connection with the world. And they told him that's true, there is a chalice that will bring you a connection with the world, a sense of serenity. But by having something that can make you feel so good, can lead to wanting power, to wanting to control that. And that it can become almost like a drug. And that they reached a point where they were charging people vast sums of money for people to feel good for periods of time. And that what was needed wasn't just having a good feeling, but making that last and learning from it. And they wouldn't teach people how to learn from the good feeling. So people would have the good feeling, and then it would pass, and they'd remember how good they felt, and they'd want to buy the experience again, and again, and again. And they got greedy, and eventually a wizard turned up and told them they're abusing something wonderful. And then banished them into the clouds, turned them all to wolves, and vanished himself. And they took the man to this chalice, and they sat the man down and they said, "We don't just want to give you this. We're not going to take any money from you for this or any gifts for this. We want to educate you before you have the experience, so that you know how to take this experience and use it and learn from it and make it a part of your life, so that you only have to have this experience once." And the man sat and listened, and they explained about the feeling you have, and how to replicate that feeling, how to get that feeling in everyday life, and how it's about contrast, how having the feeling all the time means you stop being aware you've got the feeling, and explained about how you need to have times where life is a bit rough, so that you can enjoy the times when life is smooth. And for a day and a night, and a day and a night, they explained and taught how to take this learning, internalize it, and look at life in a new way. And only then did they say, "We now know you're ready for the chalice." And in a vast room with just a pedestal and a chalice on the pedestal, and some spouts of water pouring from beneath the pedestal, out from the pedestal, down into a container below. They took the chalice off the pedestal, put it under one of the spouts of water, filled it up, carried it in 2 hands to the man. The man had a drink from that chalice, finished all the water in the chalice, and found himself drop to his knees, close his eyes and go inside. And he started to dream and think, and his mind began to connect, like different patterns firing in his brain, different changes happening through his body. He could feel it travelling to his fingertips, his toes, through his body, and spreading out from him, connecting with everything else. And after a while, suddenly, as if it was like a click of the fingers, everything was gone. The experience was gone. He just felt peace, serenity, compassion. And then he heard a rumbling as he opened his eyes and looked around him. And everyone seemed a bit nervous about what this rumbling was. And he saw all these wolves beginning to go misty and start to transform. And he could see through the windows that the horizon was moving. And all these wolves began to transform and turn back into humans. And then suddenly there was a massive thud and a splash sound. And everyone went running out the front of the castle. And they were no longer on a cloud. They'd landed back where the lake was, back on the ground again. And at the entrance to the castle's grounds, they saw the vast entrance open, and in walked a wizard. And everyone went silent. And over the space of a number of minutes, he walked up towards the castle. And then he walked up the steps. And he walked up to what turned out to be the king of this castle. It was the wolf that the man had spoken to when he arrived. And the wizard told them they'd learned their lesson. They taught this man properly. They'd shown great insight. They're ready to teach others the same message, and to spread that message out into the land again, and to teach for free. And then the wizard vanished into thin air. The phoenix vanished into thin air. The king thanked the man, who then left the castle, left the grounds, went back to his boat, took his boat onto the river, and rowed his boat back down the river, heading back to his home to share his tale, to share his learnings, the wisdom he'd learned, the knowledge, and to process the experience and get a good night's sleep.